morning, and welcome to the United Christian Academy Virtual Chapel Service. I'm Dr. David Listener. Thank you for joining us as we take some time to worship today. I have a question for you. I know this is that time of year. We're wrapping up the marking period, and everyone is answering all sorts of questions on quizzes and tests and putting together papers and projects. So I know you're being inundated with questions. So I'm going to only ask you just one. But it's an important question because it's an eternally related question. It's a question that's going to impact the rest of your life as to how the course of things will unfold for you. So it's a very important question, but there's just one. And that question is this: who is Jesus? When Jesus was with his disciples, he posed this very question to them. And we're going to explore the answer to that as we see it in Mark's Gospel. Mark chapter 8, verse 27 through 30, it explains to us a bit as to how Jesus was interacting with his disciples. And he posed this question to them. And the answer is absolutely profound. You're going to find that it'll help you as we're facing some difficult times, because Jesus was preparing his disciples for some rough waters as well. So let's take a look here at Mark chapter 8, verses 27 through 30. The Word of God tells us this: Jesus went out along with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he questioned his disciples, saying to them, "Who do the people say that I am?" They told him, saying, "John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, but others one of the prophets." And he continued by questioning them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered and said to him, "You are the Christ." And he warned them not to tell anyone about him. Now we have these two questions, but before we explore them, let's take a look at the setting in which this is occurring. Jesus is speaking, and it tells us here in Mark's Gospel, at the base of Caesarea Philippi. He is right by Mount Hermon. He's in the northern region there, and he's by the Jordan River, which is the water source that is flowing through the area, and Mount Hermon actually feeds the Jordan at this particular juncture. And we know that in this area, it is the center for pagan worship. So he is in a very religious type setting when he poses this question. Baal was the local god, if you would, that the Canaanites had worshipped at this place. He was the god of nature, and they would go to this particular location to worship Baal with the hope that they would have good fertility, that their flocks would increase, that their herds would grow, that their crops that they would sow and the seeds that hit the ground would actually produce a lot of fruit. And they saw Baal as the Lord of heaven, so they'd go there to make these sacrifices. And so when we're looking at this particular setting here, it's important to realize that they're thinking about pagan worship. In fact, the Greeks named the place Pan. The birthplace of Pan was here. Paneas is a village nearby, and they saw Pan as the god of nature. So there's a lot of activity swirling around. Herod had built a couple of temples there, and it was a setting where when you walked through and when you visited Caesarea Philippi, what would come to mind would be this notion of worship, pagan worship, unfortunately. And it's against this backdrop that Jesus is posing the question. He wants to know, well, in light of where we are and all these people who are circulating about who have a whole variety of beliefs, similar to what we see today, because let's face it, people believe in all sorts of crazy stuff today. We're in a culture that has all sorts of beliefs that run in a lot of different directions. And we need to ask the question, against this backdrop of confusion, who do people say that Jesus is? And some had replied, well, John the Baptist. Others had said Elijah, others the prophet. And here's the point. They missed the point. They didn't really see Jesus for who he truly is. And then Jesus turns around and he personalizes the discussion before going any further. He says, well, what about you? Who do you say that I am? And notice how, he asks this general question, what's going on around us here? We're in this pagan place. We have all these people who are coming here to worship Baal and Pan and everything else under the sun. And so there's a lot of confusion out there as they report back, because no one really can give him a solid answer. And then he makes it very poignant. He aims it directly at them. He says, well, what about you? What do you say? And the journey of 1,000 miles, the old proverbial statement would say, starts with the first step. And if you get that first step wrong, you could end up going in a very bad direction. And this is something important for the disciples to grapple with. And so do we. We must understand what this answer is all about. Because if we're going to relate to somebody, we need to know something about that person. If you're going to relate to me, if you're going to go out on a date, you want to know something about the person you're dating. If you're going to take a class, you want to understand a little bit about that class. When we enter into relationships, or at least try to have a relationship, we need to know something about the person we're relating to in order for us to know how to interact. And this is why this first step is absolutely so critical. So we find the answer here. And Peter says, "You are the Christ." And Christ is not Jesus's last name, by the way. And a lot of people think that, first name is Jesus, last name is Christ. That's not true. If you were to ask Jesus his name, he would say Jesus bar Joseph, which would mean Jesus, son of Joseph. And like I would be David bar William, David the son of William. But when we talk about Christ here, when Peter brings up Christ, he is bringing up his title. And his title tells us something about him. And we find, if you ask anybody, about a title, it gives us a direction as to who they are, and we now know how to interact with them. So if you, speak with an officer out there and it's Sergeant Smith, then we know that we're interacting with perhaps a law enforcement person, Dr. Jones or Judge Adams or Senator Thomas. You see how these titles suddenly set the stage for how we will interact with this person. The same thing holds true with Jesus. When we find out that he is the Christ, when Peter makes this proclamation, just this one word puts tremendous definition of who Jesus is, his mission, his purpose, his work, but most importantly, his identity. It tells us here that he is the fulfillment of all the Old Testament prophecies coming into play. The word Christ, or Mashiach, as we would say in Hebrew, means to be anointed, to be set apart, to be used for something sacred, holy. And when you anointed a person in the Old Testament, you would set them apart, dump some oil on them, and now they were going to have a special mission that was going to be designated for God's purpose, not something just for themselves. So it was considered sacred. And in the Old Testament, they would anoint a prophet or a priest or a king or even a deliverer. And in this case, Jesus is all of these. And he is prophet, priest, king. He is Messiah, and he is going to deliver and do a fantastic work. But to understand that work, we have to see Messiah in its full scope and understanding. The Jews, sadly, had expected a political Messiah. They thought somebody was going to come in under the rubric of Messiah and take away all their suffering, all their pain. They would be freed from the Romans. And that was what they were looking for. They had this very narrow expectation. Their definition of who Messiah is or was would be someone who would sweep the land of, all of this, corruption with the politics and, the emperor and the soldiers running around and the taxes and, just having to, listen to someone who is not a Jew dictate how they, ran their stores and, took care of their shops and plowed their fields. They were under, the hand of Rome, and they wanted to be delivered from that. They wanted to be rescued from that. And the problem is that they had this very narrow definition of who Christ or Messiah is. And because of that, when Jesus shows up on the scene, they're terribly disappointed because their definition was very, very limited in scope. And this is the same problem that we have today when we talk about Jesus and we ask, who is Jesus in our lives? Some people think, well, Jesus is somebody who's going to, fix my life. He's going to, put my marriage back together again, or he's going to, help my kids grow up. I mean, I knew a guy years ago, he went to church, and I was surprised he was going to church because I didn't think he was even a Christian. And he said, yeah, I want to go to church because, I want my kids to learn good morals. Well, that's a good reason to go to church, but you're going to miss some of the point here. That's not the whole idea of going to church. Some people go to connect with religion and Christianity because, they're depressed and they want to feel better about life, or they want some guidance when it comes to their finances. Some of us will pray, hoping that God will get us through and give us better grades, or, help us deal with some bullies or some problems with a teacher, or, the list just goes on. And what we really see Jesus as is more like a plumber, or an electrician, or somebody who's going to, fix some problems around the house and patch things up so I can go on and live my life. And we end up getting very disappointed, especially when difficult times comes, because we miss the mission of the Messiah. It's kind of like, imagine your knee is hurting you, and you have this pain in your knee, and you decide you're going to go to the doctor, and the doctor looks at you and says, well, I need to perform heart surgery. And you're thinking to yourself, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Heart surgery? I've got a pain in my knee. And you probably would walk away very disappointed because what you thought would be the cure, having maybe something done to your knee, doesn't happen. And this is what we have with Jesus. A lot of times we think, well, Jesus is just going to make my whole world better, and that's not his point of coming here. The mission of the Messiah was not to make us happy, but to make us holy. And a lot of times we get very disappointed with God. And when this happens, we have a tendency to fall away. We get very upset. We feel despondent and despair, disappointment, and we sometimes even will stop praying, stop going to church, stop wanting to be engaged in any form of a relationship with him. And that's what this disappointment can create. And you may not be the first person on the planet to experience some disappointment with God. I certainly did. I was diagnosed, as some of you may know, with cancer many years ago, and I prayed. And I thought, God, I really would like for you to cure me and heal me and put me back together again. And he was doing that, but it was a long, slow, painful process. In fact, God did bring me through and carried me through the mess, but he didn't do it miraculously like I thought or like I hoped for. Instead, he used doctors, and I went through a lot of surgeries, and it turned out, I spent, probably close to 40 days in the hospital. I had chemotherapy, which was absolutely excruciating in terms of, getting sick all the time and just feeling raunchy for weeks on end. I couldn't eat anything. Everything came up, and I had a very, very difficult time. It took me probably 3 to 4 months to get through the entire cancer ordeal, and I was disappointed with God. Because I thought, well, God answers prayer, and God is powerful, and God loves me, and he cares, and he's gracious. Why doesn't he just make everything better? I'm praying to him, and I'm trusting him for this. And I didn't realize that he was using that difficulty to hone and craft and shape me and, transform me from the inside out. And as a result, because I didn't get what I wanted, and I had these expectations with God, I got very angry. I was very disappointed. In fact, I didn't even pray for a long period of time because I just sort of thought that God turned his back on me. Why? Because I didn't understand who Messiah really is and what his mission is about. You see, Jesus came to craft and to shape us and to make us more like himself. And that's his purpose, is to rescue us, to save us, not necessarily to make all of my dreams come true. And when that happened, when I had that fallout with God, I was very disappointed until the phone rang. And it was about maybe 4 months after I had gone through my cancer ordeal. And I was still very angry with God, angry over the fact that I went through all this suffering. I had all these bills. I was trying to dig out from under a mountain of medical receipts that had been piling up. I owed thousands of dollars to the doctors. And, I'm working, like crazy to try to pay off all of this. And the phone rings. And there's this woman on the line. She said, and I knew her. She was a woman that went to my church, and she said, "Could you talk to my cousin?" And this guy I never even knew. I never met. His name was Phil. And she says, "Could you talk to Phil? He's in the hospital right now, and he has the same type of cancer you have." And I thought, well, I don't know what to say to this guy. I mean, is he a Christian? What am I going to say to him? And she's like, "Look, I'm right here in the hospital room with him, and I want you to know." He has a probability of living through the week of maybe 25%. The doctors have just given him his last dose of chemotherapy. He can't take any more medicine, and he has a 25% chance of living through the week. They really don't think he's going to make it. Do you think you could talk to him? And I thought, what am I going to say to this guy? I'm still angry with God. I'm disappointed. And I wasn't sure. And then all of a sudden, he's on the line. And he's like, hello, and I introduced myself, and he just asked me a few questions. He said, well, what happened to you? And I explained my story of discovering the lump and going through surgery 1 and surgery 2 and being in the hospital for all this time and being all cut open and having the chemotherapy and the like. And I just kind of told him my story, and I said, I'm still alive, and God has carried me through, and I don't understand how or why, but I'm still here, and I guess he's extended some grace to me. And all of a sudden, this guy is crying on the other end of the line. And I'm like, Yves, what did I say? Did I say something wrong? I'm really feeling bad about this because he's bawling on the other end of the line. And he said, Dave, he's like, I just have hope now. I have hope that I can make it through. And I'm like, well, I'm glad I gave you some hope, but I don't know how that happened. I wasn't even sure, what I said that might have even helped this guy, but I just told him my story. And I think the fact that I was just breathing was the fact that, that's where he drew some strength. And he said, I just need some hope, because you see, I've got a wife and I've got, 4 children. I've got a little girl who's 9, and I've got triplets, 3 boys. They're all 7 years old. And I don't know what's going to happen if I don't make it. But I have hope now. And, so I told him I'd pray for him, and, I shared his prayer request with our church, and, we prayed for him there. And that guy made it. I found out like a couple weeks later, he's pulling through, and he actually survived. That week went through, and he didn't die, and he made it through another week and another week, and he had that hope. And I was just stunned by it all. And, he ended up living, and he recovered fully from his cancer. In fact, he ended up going with his children down to Disney World. Pepsi found out about his story, and they were really thrilled to hear about him surviving, and they wanted to encourage the family a little bit. So they paid for a whole trip to Disney World that following spring. But I discovered that God was doing something in the midst of my mess and my storm as Messiah that I didn't realize he was doing, at least at the time. And that was, he wasn't just looking to bring me and carry me through the fire, but he was looking to birth a ministry. It was a whole ministry that I never realized was coming about because of this cancer crisis. And sometimes we don't always see what God is doing because he doesn't disclose fully his plan. And that's why he wants us to walk by faith and trust him as Messiah. You see, the Jews expected a Messiah to conquer Rome. Jesus came to conquer Satan. He came to conquer sin, and he came to conquer death. Our worst disease is sin, and he came to heal that. And the mission of the Messiah was to liberate us from sin so that we could live in right relationship with God. And what ends up happening is that if we don't realize that Messiah, Jesus Christ, the one that we see in the Bible, loves us deeply and has a plan to carry us not out of or remove us from all these trials and tribulations, but to carry us through them so that we would be crafted and shaped and have ministries to reach out to other people around us and to help other people and to encourage other people and to give other people hope. We go through these tough times so that we could actually connect and be part of other folks' lives and help them along the way. And it is in these trials that, as painful and as difficult as they are, we are shaped into more and more like him. So I want to encourage you that think long and hard about who is Jesus. Do you understand his mission? Do you understand his purpose? And do you understand how he's going to take you and I, if we're willing to trust him and we're willing to follow him and we're willing to give our lives over to him, he's going to take us through some really rough moments like we are going through right now. Because you see, Christianity is not a pleasure cruise. It's a lifeboat. And Jesus Christ is the captain. So I want you to hang on to some of these thoughts and truths, and hopefully they'll bring some hope into your life, and realize that anything you're going through right now, no matter how hard it is, there's purpose behind it. And in the end, he's crafting and shaping you so that you may be able to connect with other people and draw closer to him and have a closer walk with him. So I hope you found this message to be a bit encouraging. If you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with me through the website here. You could send me a text or an email. I'd be more than happy to interact with you and answer whatever questions you may have. But I do hope and pray that you would stand upon him, the solid rock, Jesus Christ. In him we have our hope. Have a great day, and God bless you. Take care now.